Thank you very much. My name is Arseniy. I'm going to talk with you today about motion-driven games, about a bunch of different examples from the industry that I enjoy, and about games that we make at Party for Introverts. Before I do that, I wanted to quickly make a disclaimer. Everything that I'm saying right now, some of you may know I work at PlayStation as well. Everything I say today is my own opinion, take, even if something I'm referencing as a thought or a game of another person can still be my interpretation. Lastly, all the images at this presentation are either taken from the internet or assets from our own games. I can't draw, that's not in my skill set. So there you go. Let's begin with talking about story versus gameplay. So, no, I apologize. We're actually going to talk first about Party for Introverts. So I'm a co-founder of Party for Introverts, and I've been doing motion-driven games with my partner and fiance, Laura Gray, who's here in the audience. And we've made 2 games together so far. One is called Thing in Itself, which was released in 2017 and was actually showcased for the first time at AdventureX, which we're very grateful for. And the second game, which we released recently, is From Head to Toe. I'm going to talk about them a little later. But for now, I'll start with the story versus gameplay paradigm that pretty much everybody here probably is familiar with. I feel like everybody had to pick a side at a certain point of their gaming career. I definitely was in the story camp for a very long time. I feel partially that's because when I was growing up, a lot of gameplay-based games were 3D, and my computer wasn't able to play 3D games. So I boycotted them. But things changed gradually, and especially when I started to make my own games, I realized that actually, from my perspective, not story or gameplay are the cornerstone of the development, and instead it's emotion. So to talk a little more about this point, I'm going to start with gameplay specific stuff. So here are some images I made for my old presentation, just an assembly of all kinds of games to remind people that they can be vastly different. And none of those examples particularly are focused on a story. So it is gameplay. And all of these experiences are valid, very different. What makes a good gameplay? How do you do that? Is it difficulty, innovative mechanics? Do you need battle royale? That's very debatable. But I wanted to reference a book by a very talented game designer, Jesse Schell, who is a professor at my master's program. And the thing that he was telling us, by the way, recommend this book to everybody for designers or general population. And he was talking about how a lot of people are hesitant to say that they are gamers, that they play games. But when you talk a little deeper, you always find at least one experience, like Tetris or something like this, that they genuinely enjoy. And when you reference this, they say, oh, that's different. That's just an emotion that I had back then, a memory that's, evokes something in me that's unrelated to the game. But that's the point. This is the most important part about this. I'll show 2 examples here of traditionally gameplay-oriented games. And the first example is a recent hit, Baba Is You, which is a wonderful game, very gameplay focused because it's a puzzle game. Essentially, you're following the rules and bending the rules in order to solve those puzzles and get to a flag. So to illustrate my point, I want to show a short trailer for this game, an old one. And I think it actually does capture a lot of what I'm trying to say. Also, it will help. Oh, okay, good. Help people who weren't familiar with the game to understand the rules as well. arguably, I believe that this moment is the most important part of the game. So essentially, when you stop following the rule Baba is you, or you stop being an entity, you lose. There's luckily a mechanic that can revert it and you can keep solving the puzzle. But this is, everything in this game, in my opinion, is built around this sense of existential dread that, that happens to you when you stop being Baba, when you don't exist anymore. And everything in this game, the aesthetic, graphics, ambience, everything supports it. And this is what makes the game so powerful and not just catchy gameplay. The next example, I will never tire talking about this, Papers, Please. I think it's a game design masterpiece, and not just because of the gameplay. So for those who are not familiar, gameplay is focused around bureaucracy and minutia. It's about a border control person who's letting people through the border to another country, or not letting them, depending on the status of their documents. And there's a rule book, and it always changes, and it's actually very engaging despite of how it sounds. And but in my opinion, again, this is not the point. The point is that you have organic choices in this game. They're not kind of a telltale style things where you pick one way or another. In this game, you have a family to feed. You need to keep the apartment warm. You need to make sure they're not sick, they're not dead. And it's kind of an important point. Every time when you make a mistake at your work, you get fined, and that means you bring less money home. And that means that somebody can get sick, somebody can die because of this. And the most powerful moment to me in this game was when there was a couple who was passing the border. I think there was a husband who was first, and his papers are fine, and you would normally let them through. But they ask to make sure that you pass their spouse as well. And then when the wife comes in, her documents are not okay. And here you are at a dilemma. Either you do the right thing from the book's perspective and send the wife away and break up a family to let them potentially never see each other again. Or you risk having your own family sick, dead, in terrible circumstances. And this is what makes it so powerful, the emotion behind it. And just to make a note here, there is an endless game in this mode. And I personally never once launched it. I don't even know how it looks like. And I think this is one of the reasons why I'm conveying this. So similarly to gameplay, I feel like story, controversially maybe, is not the driving force of the emotion. Story is also an element, a tool in order to convey it. What do you need to have a good story? You arguably need to spell it correctly, use some grammar rules, know, storytelling laws, story structure, arcs. A lot of people like. Some people say bad childhood, but all of these things, except for maybe bad childhood, can be taught. This is a skill. However, arguably, this is not the most important thing. You can know these rules very, very well, and if you don't have anything to say, even the best skilled writer is still going to tell a story that's going to fall flat. When I first learned about Hero's Journey, which is, for those who don't know, kind of a storytelling template that everything uses, like nearly every movie, let alone Hollywood movie, is following that structure. It's like a 12-step process. And it inevitably ends in transformation. It's a very useful tool, don't get me wrong, and everybody should know it. But my problem was always the fact that there is this specific template, and in a certain step, there is a resurrection, there is overcoming an obstacle and changing. And people, if they change, the change happens very gradually. It's even debatable if people change at all. But fitting this change into a 90-minute piece is very challenging to make the experience relatable. And it's done many times, but again, it requires a lot of skill to do so. And what I want to reference here is a book by one of my favorite authors, Jean-Paul Sartre, called Nausea. And in this book, he is talking about the false nature of story structure. Because as a storyteller, you're talking about something that happened in your life, for instance. Like, I went out for a walk at night, and it was a chilly and cold air, and I went by the lamppost. And you, as a listener of the story, know that there's a reason why this person mentioned the lamppost. There's a reason why the weather was important. It was to set the atmosphere. But at the time when the person was experiencing this, none of this was part of a narrative. Things were just happening. So that means that all of this is kind of a lie. It's just a constructed narrative, and the only thing that's important there is the message behind it. Everything else is kind of part of this game. I'll kind of skip some of the slides for efficiency. I wanted to say that a lot of people, there's a lot of stigma for short games, like we experienced it firsthand. But some people may argue that this doesn't apply to games and that games should be longer, and I would violently argue against that. And I want to show a couple of examples of games that I believe are very much worth playing, that are, I think all of them are like under 15 minutes, and one of them is ours, so I'm a little biased, but please check them out. They are really good experiences, I think, proving my point very well. Next thing I want to talk about is the importance of specific emotional moments. So there is a lot of, I think there is some confusion about the emotional theme and the emotional moment. A lot of times you would get excited about a game or a movie that's coming out that's about something that you're interested in. For me, you know, every time when there is something about depression, anxiety, family matters, relationships, that's something that I think I'm going to be interested in. And then a lot of times I'm checking out these experiences and they just don't follow through for me. They're not as exciting as I want them to be. And that, I believe, is because somebody focuses too much on the theme and don't think about specific moments. And as an example, I want to bring up this show called BoJack Horseman, which I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with. And for those who are not, the narrative is that there is a washed-up actor, Hollywood actor, who is trying to go through an existential crisis for a bunch of seasons of the show. And it's not a very relatable story. Not a lot of us are Hollywood actors, not a lot of us are experience this world even. But what makes show very relatable is that every episode has a bunch of little snippets, little moments that are just so, they just hit the ground, you know, and you can remember them way past you finish watching. And the second example from the gaming industry I would bring is Undertale. And although there is tons of stuff in this game that's amazing, there is a very compelling world, very original, a lot of like a very exciting gameplay loop. It's, you know, there's tons of stuff that the game did right. But for me, everything else is secondary to this specific moment that just stayed with me about Toriel's house. Toriel is a mother figure in the game. She kind of adopts you and feeds you butterscotch pudding, and you can stay there pretty much indefinitely for many game days. I can't tell you how many days I've stayed in this house. Like, it's not essential for the story, but thing is that as soon as you're trying to leave, she doesn't want you to, because she's your mother and she doesn't want to let you go. And I felt so horrible that I just kept doing this loop over and over again. And I just wanted to play that game, honestly, like as great as Undertale is in general. And yeah, this is just an example. I have a first-hand experience with this too. So after Thing in Itself, which was a short game, we tried to, we thought, well, logically, we should make a bigger game after this. So we made I wanted to talk about OCD, which is an issue that I've struggled with pretty much my whole life, and, you know, obsessive-compulsive disorder is something I wanted to talk about and to share my feelings. And I thought, okay, since it's a longer game, I'm gonna focus on the story structure. So I came up with story beats. I've devised a gameplay loop around this, and did some research, interviewed some people, and in the end it just didn't work out. The game didn't add up together, even though I had all these things. And I think the reason is that I just didn't access those specific moments that I wanted to show. It didn't sew together the experience. And I still want to make this game, and I hope I will be able to one day with Laura, but that's just didn't happen. To the contrast from this, Thing in Itself, our first game, I think was successful in this regard, because so Thing in Itself is a game about struggles of understanding another human being based on this, you know, philosophical concept, and it follows the story of a breakup. But it's not a game about a breakup, actually. It's focused on this very specific moment from my own life. It's essentially when I was like 11 years old, and I had a lot of feelings for this girl, and I didn't know how to talk with girls yet. It was really awkward, and I got her phone number, and we had like 2 or 3 calls, and all of them were very kind of non-substantial. It was not an entertaining conversation. So in the end of the 2nd or 3rd one, she said, yeah, so bye, and please don't call me anymore. And she was totally right, I'm sure, like, because, I mean, these were not great conversations. It was not a good move. Point is that that's when I first time experienced heartbreak, and I understood what that means. And, you know, that was almost literally feeling of a heart shattering inside. And this feeling stayed with me for many, many years. And like, I remember it, I can access it. And this is what I devised this game around. It was not just a breakup story. It was a story of this specific moment put in a wrapper, you know. And this is what I think worked for it. So what do you do with this information? As a producer, I can say that games are a very difficult medium. They have tons of different parts and require a lot of skill and resource, but that's not everything. It's definitely not all you need to do to make a powerful game. So yes, there are all these disciplines. There are many more. All of them break down in further steps. I can make like a bunch of different slides, expand and further. But you don't need to be a specialist in all these things to make it really work. Undertale, again, coming back to it, is a great example of how a very small team could make a very powerful thing, which is a big hit. But arguably, again, the most important thing that we made is a sincere message, and it's really great. So please don't let these kind of things stop you from putting your message, emotional message through. I'm going to give some more examples of games. In the interest of time, I'm going to skip a few. But the first one would be Psychonauts. I'm sure most of you have played it, know what it is about, but the gist is that this kid, he is able to, and a bunch of other people, access the mind and psyche of other characters in the game. And one of the characters is Milla. Milla is a party person. She likes dancing, she likes music, that's what's in her head. The whole level is done on a ball, literally. You're just following around and having fun in the disco music. And that is until you access this very specific little room. And she says, "Darling, this is not a good place to be. The party is over there. This is a sad room." And the reason is because this is the area where she represses her memories and where she has this feeling of guilt, because a memory is she left home, and when she came back, she saw a fire, and that's where all her children died. And this is a terrible, sad story and a very creepy moment, and it's very powerful. And I think despite how much cool stuff is happening in Psychonauts, gameplay-wise, content-wise, these kind of moments are what pieces the experience together. I'm going to skip those two, even though I really want to talk about them, just for the sake of time. I'm gonna also talk about Super Meat Boy, interestingly enough. Maybe a lot of you have watched Indie Game the movie, and if you didn't, you should. Normally, a lot of people wouldn't associate platformers with something emotional, but in this experience, I think they made a wonderful point. And I normally don't play difficult games because I'm bad at them, and I do play them, but I play them for a short time. This one I played much longer, and that's because of all the care that's put into this game. And one of those things, one of those examples, is that Meat Boy actually is not a boy made out of meat. Meat Boy is a boy without skin. And what he's trying to do through all the levels is to reach his girlfriend, who is Bandage Girl. And the reason why he wants to do that is that the only way he can stop feeling pain, agony. And I think it's a very powerful message, and I think these kind of details, these kind of emotional things are what actually makes this game so great, and many others. So next thing I would like to talk about is the anatomy of our own games and the way we build them. First game is Thing in Itself. Thing in Itself is an experience about struggles to understand another human being based on a philosophical concept by Immanuel Kant that pretty much says that you can't understand an essence of any kind of an object in this world. And I was elaborating in the story a little on the fact that how can you possibly understand another human being in this case? As I mentioned before, it's not based, it's based on this specific moment from my own life, that, specific phone call. And it's wrapped around the philosophical concept, so that serves kind of a storytelling device. After this, I did actually go through a very painful, complicated breakup at the time, but that's not what this game is about. It just was more of a research. So for me, it was an opportunity to understand how people feel in those moments, how I feel, and I wanted to tell about it, and it made me feel comfortable with the language, essentially. After this, I wrote the script, and based on the script, I don't know what happened because... Okay, there you go. Based on the script, I've devised interactions that will help a player to associate better with the content of the game. The next game we released very recently, called From Head to Toe. It's about the winter, existential guilt, and your ex-classmates. And it's about a girl, Betty, who's coming to her hometown and has a familiar walk with her best friend from high school, Quentin. And again, it's based on an emotion. So as a foreigner here, every time when I come back home to Moscow, I always experience a range of things. And among others, there is this friend who I used to have night walks around my house, and I remember particularly snow. I remember the lamp lights. I remember our conversations. We had a very particular set of swings that we used to use and talk, and this is a cornerstone interaction in the game. And finally, there is this concept of true memory. We as people have so many experiences throughout the years, and they just keep piling up, and you can't have them in the front of your head all the time, otherwise you wouldn't be able to function. And what happens instead is when you think of one specific detail sometimes, you can just summon those experiences back, and it just covers you fully. And this is what I wanted to talk about. This is what's close for me to home here. It was wrapped around music, which is a tune that a lullaby that I came up with on my guitar many years ago, back when I was in Moscow, that I associate with those kind of memories. And luckily, we have a wonderful friend, Alex Francois, the creator of Slaughter, and he made it sound beautiful. He developed it into an actual song, and it's just wonderful. And I think it works very well with the game. Again, around all this, there was a script, and from the script, there were interactions. That's how we did our experiences. In conclusion, I wanted to talk with you about a conversation, I guess about an interview I heard of Genova Chen, who is a co-founder of that game company who made such great things as Journey and Flow. And we were showcasing From Head to Toe at one of the conferences, and it was very business-driven. It was, all about KPIs and user acquisition and that kind of stuff. And we brought like a free short game there, and a lot of people just didn't kind of understand why and what were we doing with our lives. And it was kind of a strange place to be. But it was so refreshing to hear him talk about things that I've talked with people about for years, and just to hear it from somebody else. It was like a kindred spirit, And one of the things he was talking about was game genres and the fact that they are very focused on actions that player performs, like a shooter, if you strategize, if you solve puzzles. And at the same time, movie genres are different, and they're based on an emotion that the person experiences while they're watching it. And but maybe that's because games were not as developed emotionally back in the time when these genres were created. But I guess my point is that we can definitely make that happen, and happen faster. And my advice here would be to make your games personal, first of all, and talk about things from the heart, your actual experiences, to show how you actually feel in specific moments, in things that actually touch you and that are important for you to convey. And again, in my humble opinion, everything else in game dev is secondary. That's my advice to you. If we have time for questions, I'd be happy to answer them. This is my account. This is Party for Introverts account. So feel free to get in touch. And thank you very much.